Okay, hi everyone. I'm Kerry Hecht, the CEO and founder of 10K Humans, and I am here today with Adam from Panoplai. So, Adam, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what Panoplay's got going on?
Yeah, thanks for having me here, Kerry. I am Adam Bai, and I lead strategy and client services and consulting stuff at Panoplai. I've been around since the beginning, and since I guess the founder Neil was a little bit more of a product and engineering guy, although now he's a consummate CEO. I think I brought to the table a little bit of a client perspective, and thinking about ultimately the intersection between technology, generative AI, market research, and those things that corporations and other kinds of organizations want to accomplish. And let's see, I started off as an anthropologist.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Yeah, a real academic guy. I did my PhD research primarily in China, and I was always interested in the ethnography, anthropology of science and technology and innovation. So, like aside from the tech, all the other stuff.
Yeah.
The processes, the cultural norms, the forms of circulation of knowledge and knowledge transfer that actually make innovation work or not work that the technologists are often so eager to not think about. And so after that, I launched another startup, and then this is my second.
Okay, great. So for people that don't know what Panoplai does, why don't you explain it a little bit?
Yeah. So we say we're the human data engine, human insights engine. Which is like, what the hell does that mean? We're a way of aggregating all of the data that matters to give you a much more panoramic view of what's going on in your world, in your market, with your audiences, and then doing a lot with those signals that we're able to help you listen to. So not just gathering data through surveys, not just ingesting data from other survey platforms, social listening, transaction, any source of data, unstructured data, not just using a quant dashboard to try to do the more traditional insight stuff, not just chatting with the data in a really powerful way, but also building things like digital twins, which we've become somewhat known for, and synthetic data sets on top of that secure foundation of human data. So it's really taking the best of traditional methodology and supercharging it into the future to help with decisions that organizations are faced with.
Okay, so I'm going to go just a tiny bit off script, and please don't be too upset about that. But you had said that digital twins is one of the things that you're known for. So talk to me a little bit about all of the things that you guys do, and if there was any kind of transition from where you started, which I'm sure there is, to where you are now and what you would consider your main product or offering. What is that? So give me like a little bit more of the big picture.
Yeah. Well, we started as a fancy survey platform, and the question was, how do we attain a lot more depth and nuance, linguistic specificity, attention to emotional signals with surveys, while building on some of the advantages of programmatic recruitment.
Sure.
And hoping to avoid some of the disadvantages in terms of fraud and so on. But the speed and the scope and the cost advantages, but doing more with those signals and more with those surveys. So that was the first thing, right? It was the original idea was like ask a few questions, primarily open-ended, and then use our platform to categorize the open ends and analyze them a little bit more effectively and a little bit more quickly in conjunction with your human insights experts. So, a lot like what tons of companies are doing now, like Listen Labs, et cetera. And that was kind of 4 years ago. And then we started thinking, hey, you know what? It's not really about survey data only. It's about other forms of data too. And why is it that sources of data are so siloed? And why is it that teams within organizations look at sources of data in such a alienated, siloed way? Why are there separate insights from social and from market research and from the CRM? And what are we going to do about that? So then the next thing we said is, okay, on the input side, let's actually welcome in lots of other streams of data and think about kind of clever ways to weight them and to have them talk to each other in order to provide a much more coherent panoramic picture of the market. And then we were like, okay, But maybe that's not enough. Maybe we don't just want to analyze like different streams of data. Maybe we actually want to be useful to people in different ways in terms of the analysis that the platform can do and the outputs. That is the ways that it's hooking into decision-making processes within organizations, whether it's, you're a classic insights professional or you're a marketer or you're a product person or someone who's really looking at strategic foresight and, long-term strategy. So we thought, well, let's layer on a lot more capability. So instead of just the quant dashboard, the qual dashboard, let's enable chat with data, but in a really rigorous way. So not just like hey, can you query the data and get like a kind of plausible output, but can you query the data and get a chart or a graph that's representative, that has no hallucinations, that actually does the significance testing for you, that has some kind of like quantitative power and coherence to it. And then can we layer in sort of chat questions about more qualitative stuff, like what's the story behind the change, right? So I mean, I'd say a classic example for that stage of the evolution of the company was like, what are you doing with your trackers? Like, why are you paying, $85 billion a year for product and brand trackers? And then, there's like a deck and you can see the deck every quarter, 5 people see it. Nobody else in the organization sees it. All the reports and of course the raw data, they're sitting in the dustbin in the corner, metaphorically speaking. And you've just
or literally,
or literally, and you've spent millions of dollars gathering this stuff and analyzing it, and it's doing nothing for you. So our thought was, well, let's allow people to talk to their tracker data, historical and current, and derive much more value from those trackers to discover trends, to be able to set, more careful baseline so that change becomes more visible, and to start to narrativize or explain those changes, and they might turn into barriers or opportunities. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's really, really interesting because so much of what you're talking about is parallel to the evolution of our industry over the course of the past 15 years, even 20 years, everything from starting to talk about brand trackers and marrying brand tracking and social listening, marrying those things then with behavioral data, marrying those things with a neuroscience overlay to try to get the more implicit, motivations that people have behind things. So, if you think literally about just the way our industry has been talking about handling and managing data, all of those things in the past 2 decades have had their own flash up hotspots. So it's really exciting to listen to you talk about the evolution of the company and the offering and how that has run in parallel to that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was trained for years as an anthropologist. So I'm a researcher, but I was like an academic researcher. And after that, I was, ultimately a kind of like management consultant, strategic consultant, plus the company that I had previously helped get off the ground was a learning company where we looked at transforming organizations through small group learning experiences and so on. So I'm coming to the insights world from the outside a little bit. And my business partners and colleagues within Panoplai are like dyed-in-the-wool, res tech type people who've worked at some of the bigger organizations and sampling, etc. So I think on one hand, we see ourselves very much as a continuation of those trends from within the industry. But on the other hand, I think we're trying maybe in somewhat different ways to see the world from the point of view of like a decision maker in an organization that could be part of a joint team of like insights professionals and marketers, but may not be like a trained insights professional. And, what does it look like to actually bring all of that rigor and process and historical data to bear on that moment of a decision in a way that's like faster and not so complicated and actually enables that person or that team to like get a lot closer to the consumer or the client, like in that moment of the decision.
Well, and closer to each other, right? So if you think about the different stakeholders within any organization, like getting the insights team and the marketing team on the same page is often incredibly challenging. And so I think that this again can be a useful tool for that. So taking it's just kind of diving back into the digital twin aspect of it. So there's people have a lot of feelings about this, and I think there's also a lot of so. Talk a little bit about what digital twins are and how they're built.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of strong feelings one way or another.
Yeah.
And I would say that there's also an immense amount of confusion about what they are and what they're not. And I'm not going to pretend
Sure.
that I have the exact right definition that the industry is going to settle on. I just simply want to say that there's confusion about like what's a AI persona, what's a digital twin, what's synthetic data, what's a good
Sure.
one. And
Yeah.
I think that the industry has a kind of like moment of truth that we're collectively facing that we'll have to negotiate, where some degree of shared standards and benchmarking will inevitably become important if brands and users and clients are going to trust us. Let me see, like how do I think about digital twins? I guess I came to the concept in a maybe an unexpected way, which is I've always been interested in the history of like cybernetics and modeling
Sure. Cool. Yeah.
physical systems and the relationship between human and technical systems. And if you think about the way people interact with each other and people interact with technology, and then you think about modeling those interactions such that you can mess around with them, the inputs and the outputs and the connections in a virtual context. So you're reducing the risk in a real context. That's all I'm talking about by digital twin. And actually, like the first example of a not the first one that I learned about, but the one I'm always thinking about is like very early on, GE created a digital twin of a jet engine, and then the forms of interaction like a jet engine mechanic could have with the jet engine.
Yeah, right.
And that engine's incredibly complex. It has a lot of systems and subsystems, but you really don't want to be messing with the engine once it's already in the air. And
sure.
Obviously, and then the other thing is it's really expensive for you to put the jet engine on the ground for, you know, a few hours or a few days to train somebody on it, because then it's not making you money. So what do? Well, you create a digital twin of a jet engine and you train the mechanic so that he or she can actually like plug a different thing in or change this thing or repair this thing, and you see what happens to the overall system.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way, but now that you're saying that, if you think about any sort of virtual model where it were, whether it be, you know, a race car or a flight simulator or a shopping environment or like literally anything, we use that all the time. And I think the first time we spoke, we had talked about, you know, our industry has used modeling forever, and you know, in many cases, synthetic data and it is just that we're just modeling based on what we already know.
That's exactly right.
And right, we're projecting out. But I hadn't made the transition to thinking about it in literally a physical form. You know, like a flight simulator or a virtual engine or things like that. But I think that that's a really sound analogy that is also very grounding.
Yeah, it's grounding for me. And I mean, the one thing I'd add, just I can hear your listeners thinking, but we study people and people are incredibly complex and there's emergent behaviors and there's too many variables. We're not just a closed system like a jet engine. Of course, yes, which makes modeling a lot more difficult, which means that our claims have to be much more modest, which means that the quality of input data and training data has to be a lot better and more capacious. But I think that the general analogy is still useful, right? Like we're messing around with the thing in virtual space, and we want the model that we're messing with to be more or less representative of the real world. And I always think I think it gets quoted all the time, but there's this mathematician, English mathematician named George Box, who said something like, no model is correct or no model is perfect, but some are useful. I would say like our ambition is to create useful models, and the question is what's useful these days, and I think that's a really interesting question.
I think that's another good way of framing it, in a way that incorporates the necessary humility for where we are in adoption. You know, I think I may have used this example when we talked previously, but there was during the Arab Spring, they were able, mathematicians were able to predict with surgical precision down to the block, and that, you know, within the hour of the time of day, where there was going to be uprisings and what kind of uprising there would be. And it was based on, you know, the population demographics. It was based on the stimulus of the environment. It was based on all different kinds of things. And so I do think that it's like, you know, our tendency as individuals is always to think that, you know, we have free will and we're unpredictable and all of this. But when you do start applying large amounts of numbers and different kinds of stimulus, there does become a predictive nature to this stuff, and I think it is useful to remember that, again, this is the application may be new, actually sort of not really, maybe the interfaces are new, but this has been going on and it has been useful and it has been accurate for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, social scientists, market researchers have been modeling the world to make predictions forever, and to be honest, their predictions have been terrible, which doesn't mean that their work is bad. It just means that everybody's predictions are terrible, and theirs may have been slightly better, but that's where we're coming from. So my question is just, can we do even slightly better, not with purely technical AI-driven systems, but new ways for people with, really great human judgment to interact with AI systems to create slightly better predictive accuracy? And then I would say, like, even beyond predictive accuracy, it's kind of like, can we surface interesting stuff that might lead to new ideas? So I think that a lot of the, big venture-backed companies now, are Simile, et cetera, that have been getting a lot of press. Their claim is very much like, we will model the world to predict it. Which is, and I'm not, not judging, they can do that one way or another. Like, so these agentic simulations where there's a stimulus and then the agents like run around and then there's like, hey, your ad's going to be successful. We can kind of do that as well. We being Panoplai, Nomadics, the last company 4 years ago. But I think that more importantly, what we see ourselves doing is boosting the strength of human signals by looking at different sources of data in aggregate, putting them into dialogue with one another, and then giving human researchers a kind of platform to stand on so that they can see the world a little bit more effectively. So, for instance, if we have enough training data, and we've done this for companies like Mars, we can tell you with a reasonable degree of certainty, how a particular piece of content's likely to perform. Okay, that's useful. But I think much more interesting is like, can we help you see if something's coming that your competitors can't see is coming, with the aid of AI to help sort of increase the volume a little bit of the signals and drown out the noise of the noise. And I think that's a whole other, it's related to prediction, but it's both more modest and more useful, I think, than pure prediction.
Yeah, I like that. So if you think about the company's evolution, how has your client base changed over the last few years? Have you seen much of that?
Yeah. We started with more project-based work from insights professionals in agencies and in brands. I mean, obviously, we came from where we came from. So we had our, networks, and we sold to them and they trusted us and we did a good job with the surveys. Now, everything we sell is based on a subscription, which our business model isn't that interesting, but what that signals is that most of the value is in the platform and in ongoing interactions with the platform, rather than in merely an episodic research or project-based research or sample. And there's nothing wrong with those business models, but our aspiration was always to bake enough value into the platform that people want to engage with it and interact with it a lot. So that's the first transition. I think the second transition is that the kinds of people that are looking for us, interested in us, buying us, using us, a little bit different. So I could, might say that there's still like the practitioner insights professional who wants to run the surveys, extremely welcome, and we want them in the tent. But we're seeing more and more senior insights professionals that are sort of like, to some degree, caught between a rock and in a hard place. In like, hey, use AI, but also don't want to kind of abandon the principles and methodologies that kind of got them there in the first place.
Yes.
I think that person's become a really great advocate for us across a lot of organizations, brands and MR firms. And then I think the other thing that shifted is we're getting a lot of demand from, call it marketers or product people, and not just from insights professionals. And I think that's like a product of two things. Number one is, it's cool. Like a CMO is excited to have a conversation about digital twins, but she really couldn't care less. I mean, she might, but probably doesn't care less which survey platform you're using, right?
Right, for sure. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, if there's a lot of fraud or the data quality is bad or there's a systemic issue, she'll become aware of that, obviously. But that idea of a digital twin can be really compelling to a senior person, right? That's number one. And then the other thing is, I think the world, the bureaucratic, functional world we're living in is sort of dissolving and reconstituting itself in interesting
Yes.
ways. So, I'm sure you've noticed, like we see insights teams that are being embedded more in other functions.
Yes.
We see cross-functional teams. We see the desire, if not the ability yet, to bring insights professionals closer to frontline decision makers and to bring frontline decisions closer to insights professionals within companies. And I think that we saw that happening when we were kind of founding the company, but we see that truly accelerating now. And that's really what we've built the company for. So, for instance, we're just in a pilot, with a huge company, and that company, the people that are evaluating us are a mix of marketers and insights professionals. And we need to be useful for both sets of people. They're both in the pilot. There's a core group of people who are like pressure testing the methodology and, is your stats testing good and the whole thing. And then there's another more peripheral group of people, not peripheral to the organization, but peripheral to like insights world, who are like, can we just ask a simple question and be pretty confident that the outputs are going to be representative and accurate? Yeah. And can it take like 5 seconds? And then can we do something different with marketing based on the output? So it's serving different masters, or rather like a joint team where people have different needs. And I think that's the other change that we've seen.
But that is the point, right? I mean, and I think whenever you see a great, revolution of any kind, and AI is certainly one of them there. And like you said, there's systems that are dissolving and rebuilding themselves. And there's also, to some degree, a democratization that takes place. Yeah. And, that democratization leads to new leaders in a space. But there is this kind of great leveling of skill sets, because there just kind of has to be.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's a really good point. And I mean, the way when I'm talking with like a client or a prospect, the formula that I've stumbled on that seems to bring that to life is I say, look, we really believe in centralized governance, but democratized usage. Yeah. So that means like, hey, senior insights person, we actually don't want to go around you at all to talk to the marketer. We want you in the picture. We want you to be mediating our relationship with the marketer. Why? Because our whole approach is about getting rid of black boxes. It's about using really, really rigorous quant and qual methodology. We don't want to get rid of all that stuff. We want you to work with us to make sure that all of those principles are embedded in the platform as they relate to your business goals. And then we want to give access in a way with some more guardrails and simplicity built in to lots of other people. So it's we win ultimately. I mean, as a company, like, of course we want lots of users across, but we deliver a lot more value to a company if we bring a particular audience to life, and then the value gets injected into different moments in the innovation process, in the strategic planning process around marketing. But in order for that audience to be sound, we have to make sure the right data is in there. We have to make sure that there's like a governance plan, all that stuff. Right. So it's like, it's that like constant tension between centralized governance and democratized usage that we're kind of figuring out with our clients as they're adopting the platform.
I think it's really good to have that sort of constant feedback loop, because I kind of feel like the genie is out of the bottle, like right, this is happening, and there is we see a lot in our industry where there's hesitation to use and adopt new tools or use and adopt new ideas, and often that hesitation, I think, is grounded in fear about job loss or redundancy in role, but it's masked behind rigor, right? So it's like it's being driven by fear, but we hide behind, oh no, this couldn't be rigorous enough. And I think that it is really important to recognize that the train has left the station. So let's all get on the same team and apply the rigor, whether it is to new methodologies, like actual AI moderated interviews, or whether it is the way that we're processing, thinking about, and interacting with data and something like this.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's another really good point. And I guess the way I used to think about it when I was doing like management consulting around change initiatives, transformation, is that people are often wired to confuse the tactical work they do with their purpose or their value, either to themselves or to the organization. So it's like, oh, I'm really good at, I don't know, max diff, or I'm really good at programming Qualtrics studies.
Right.
That's great. I don't want to like discount the value of those kinds of tactical, abilities or capabilities. But, I think that if people sort of go a level deeper and they start saying, hey, what I'm really good at is applying human judgment to lots of different signals from the market to like distill those into some kind of plan of action. Well, if you're at that level, then almost by definition, you're open to lots of new approaches.
Tools. Yeah, right.
Because it's like, why wouldn't you experiment with a new approach to get even better at the thing that you associate yourself with? But if you're like, what I'm really good at, and I'll do this until they fire me, is program a Qualtrics study, then change is going to be really hard for you, because maybe we won't need people to program Qualtrics studies anymore.
We won't need people to program Qualtrics studies.
That's you said it. You said it, not me. I don't want to.
Yeah, it's just the reality of it, Anyway, so before we get too far away from this, I want to circle back to how these digital twins are built. Right.
Yeah.
So you touched on this a little bit when you're talking about the evolution of the company, but I want to really drive this point home for people who are listening so that they understand, where is this data coming from? How is it being sourced? How is it being integrated? And because again, if the validity of it needs to be true, then they need to trust not only the way that it's structured and the way the tech is interacting with it, but where it comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I try to encourage people to think like a architect or a systems designer when you're building a digital twin. And I think that we, including me, have already learned some unfortunate lessons from the early success and widespread adoption of like ChatGPT, for instance, as like one approach to a large language models being one approach to, applying AI to like complex systems and so on.
Sure.
And the lesson people have learned is like, you put a thing in via prompt and then you get a thing out. And if it's not good enough, you just kind of like try again. And I'm not saying that's bad. That can be really useful. But I think that's not the best way to think about market research or making strategic decisions.
Right.
And the reason is that the inner workings of the model, to some degree, are always going to be black box. That's unfortunately how generative AI works, right? It's
how software works. Yeah.
Yeah, and generative AI even more, because the weights and so on are going to be like, it's like there's a whole discipline of forensic specialists that go back in and try to figure out how Gen AI like made certain decisions or generated certain outputs. Like there's some degree of black box stuff. But what we want to do is minimize that as much as possible. So we want to have very deliberate human designed architecture of digital twins. So what does that mean? That means that at the foundation, and this is like our decision, it's not necessarily the only way to go, but it's something we believe in. At the foundation, we have representative scaled data that has a quantitative dimension. Why do we do that? Well, ultimately, you're trying to bring to life either an individual or a representation of a segment, some kind of audience or consumer segment. But if you're not able to channel trading data and signals and stimuli and so on through the lens of that particular segment, then you really can't bring that segment to life. And in order to have any kind of sense of the full scope of the audience that you're looking at or the set of segments or whatever, you need quantitative data in there. Yes. Which is why we've kind of been built to be quant first, which isn't to say like quantitative data sets can include like open ends, or they can't be like a compilation of, IDIs or whatever, but we need some representative scale, and that's the foundation.
Sure.
And then on top of the foundation, we'd love to layer in a few different things. So one is we call it, unstructured data or semi-structured data, like focus group transcripts, IDI transcripts, stuff like that. Social scrapes. Of course, we want to curate and clean them and so on. And then other sources of consumer market signals. And then the new thing we can do, which is cool, and this is early days for everybody, but we've seen some really encouraging early successes, is layer in behavioral signals as well. So that could be like performance marketing data, or most importantly, probably transaction data. Purchase history, things like that. And then you imagine like the top of the pyramid. We want to also be able to ingest like decks and existing segmentations and typing tools and things like that. Why?
Sure.
Not because it's like raw data necessarily that we want to interpret, but we want to understand how people within the organization want to see the underlying
Right.
data, right? So it's kind of training the system to see through the lens of that stuff. And then the last thing I'd say is, and this seems like a small point, but actually ingesting that foundational data as raw data, it turns out, is like everything. So most platforms, I'm not going to say we're the only one that can, but most platforms can't ingest survey data as raw data because it's complicated. You know, I mean, sometimes surveys are really complex. Like we work with the management consultancy that's like really well known, and they run these like huge studies with, you know, it's a separate question whether or not they should be doing that, right? But in any event, like it's not easy to ingest on a columns and rows basis. So, but why is that important? Why can't we just ingest like a report or a gloss on the raw data like a lot of platforms do? It's because if we want different data sets to talk to each other, if we're looking at them on the basis of like a PowerPoint deck, they're totally incommensurable, right? Like one might look at the world through the lens of, I don't know, shopper emissions, and one might look at the world through the lens of, you know, marketing personas. But the underlying data, we can maybe put it into dialogue and to start to see overlaps and so on. And that's essentially what our system is doing when it's bringing to life like a digital twin. So anyway, long story short, like we have all that stuff in the system.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, there's an enormous weighting problem because it's like, how do you look at, I don't know, you know, 10 IDIs that are half an hour each versus 1,000, you know, person survey versus a social scrape. But there are different kind of like tricks and so on that we've learned to kind of weight all that stuff properly, or to enable sort of custom weighting depending on what the business goal is or the client is.
Yeah. Well, and marrying it, right? Like so it's building the profiles of the people with the raw data and then applying those profiles to the, you know, because the IDIs have a profile too. So
that's
you know,
exactly right. Yep. And then all of a sudden you realize like the value, you know, a lot of clients are like, oh, we never got the raw data from Ipsos. Like, I mean, maybe I'll ask, like, or we did the IDI, but we just asked like you know, gender and age, and like maybe we should ask them a few other things to kind of profile them. And you start to learn the value of that kind of like data hygiene, because if you want your data to talk to other data, you actually have to know a lot about like where it's coming from, right? So it's good practice anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so we've when we first, we're a qualitative company, and when we first started, so we recruit in an active recruitment model, which means you go out into the wild, we find people, right?
Yeah.
So we need 10 IDIs. Let's just stick with your example. We may have hundreds, if not thousands of people hit the screener. And for the most part, we're taking them all the way through the screener. And so because we don't want them to know where they're terminating, so they can't like come back in and game the system. And so we're gathering, you know, huge amounts of data all the time. And we historically, very early days in our organization, we offered that data up to whoever the client was, you know, so that they could look at it. Nobody ever took us up on it. And I think that it's not that it didn't have value at that time, that it just doesn't, no one's got the time to mess with it, given what the processing capabilities were at the time. And so that's kind of like where we are with the game-changing nature of this. Like, there was another company, and this is easily a decade ago, if not 15 years ago, who would build, you know, so I'm, you know, a 53-year-old woman from Los Angeles who works full time, who has a bunch of pets, you know, who, you know, shops primarily online. Okay, so what else do you know about me? And they would have this massive database on a person with, you know, you could enter in those, you know, 5 data points, and they could build a profile of what else I am likely to be, right? And I think that, again, so the idea about this has been around for a long time, and if people have been trying, or organizations have been trying to crack this nut for a long time, you know, even the notion of big data for so long was like, we know it's valuable, but we just don't know what
how
to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting. It's like, or, you know, you're one of the few organizations that actually recruits with a tremendous amount of like care and intention, which is more expensive for you, even though I have to say your prices are very reasonable. So you know, that's cool. You figured that out. But there are costs to that level of, you can think of it as a kind of inefficiency. It's not, because you have other goals. But now that inefficiency, it turns out, has other benefits, which is that all of that other data you're collecting becomes immensely valuable not
It's
just
a
to you, but
product too. Yeah.
but potentially to your customers, because it's all of the context that can help bring to life people's thinking and their behavior and the
Yes.
why behind the buy and all that stuff. And it turns out that like all of the gold buried in that data pile, like which never really was accessible, practically speaking, before. I mean, except in some small limited cases, now is a lot more accessible. So it's like,
Yeah.
If we work with an MR firm of some type that has some kind of a panel or some historical data set, they're always surprised to kind of like remember that actually all the stuff they've been doing over the last few years, like a lot of it has value, but they hadn't thought about that because they weren't able to like monetize it immediately.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember exploring this idea with people again 10-15 years ago, and they were just like, it's too many rabbit holes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a person that will rabbit hole at any point on almost anything, once I started getting into
the rabbit hole,
I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I mean, I was supposed to spend an hour on this, and here I am like 5 hours in, and boy, do I sure know a lot. But does it have anything to do with the question we were actually here to answer? You're like, I don't know.
But anyway, it probably has something to do with some important question, and you'll figure that out later.
Yeah, that's right. Knowledge for knowledge's sake. So tell me, what are some misconceptions people have about digital twins?
Yeah, well, I think it's funny, like there's this weird thing where different people oscillate between making overly bold claims about them, and then people are like totally dismiss them as being useful.
Yeah.
And of course, as in most things, like the truth is somewhere in the middle, or rather the truth varies depending on the use case. So I can take you through some like pet peeves of mine if you want, like things people say.
Yeah.
I won't tell you who says them, but like, a lot of platforms will say things like, we're 85% accurate or we're 90% accurate, which is absurd. It's like, imagine an MR firm doing human research, saying that about like predictive power or something like that.
Sure. Right.
It's not possible. And, one reason it's not possible is anyone kind of competent nowadays can find some set of use cases for which their models are 95% accurate. Cool. And you can demonstrate that. We could do that too. We could be 99% accurate, but there's always a tension, even way before, generative AI, like there's always been a tension between generalizability and accuracy.
Sure.
And in order for a model to be useful, it has to be generalizable. In order for a model to be useful, it has to be accurate enough so that you're making the right decision, right? And what do I mean by generalizability? It's like, say, I don't know, I build an incredibly complex model with huge amounts of training data that tells me if my banner ad should be red or blue. It's like, is that valuable? But then I apply it to other questions about my content, and it kind of breaks down. It's not that useful. And then I apply it to other questions about marketing that are more strategic, and it's totally useless. Well, then it's not very valuable. But if I create a model that applies to everything, like you could say, ChatGPT, and I want to apply it to really specific like enterprise questions, and it's not accurate enough, or the outputs are not differentiated enough relative to my queries compared to like those of my competitor, then it's also not that valuable. So I would say that like accuracy numbers are always a function of the training data, the audience, the use case, etc. And we're always kind of constantly negotiating that tension between generalizability, like what are the use cases that it's useful for, and accuracy or depth or nuance. So I think that's the first thing. So if anyone's like, oh, don't worry, we're 93% accurate, I would say either, if you're a buyer, like either A, run the other direction, or B, ask what that means. So that's one pet peeve.
Even you saying that, it makes me say, well, like in my head, I would immediately want to align and make sure we were having the conversation about the same thing. Because I would see that it's like, well, it's not really possible for you to be 95% accurate on something that hasn't happened yet.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
You know what I mean? So I would see like, is this directionally relevant at a certain degree of confidence? But like, if someone were to say it was 95% accurate, unless it's something that already happened, I wouldn't know how you could.
Yeah. Well, and that's a really good segue, because it gets me to my second pet peeve, which is not so much like a claim, other platforms are making or something, but it's a conflation of different ways of measuring accuracy or validity. So, broadly speaking, there are only two ways to think about accuracy, validity, representativeness, right? Like number one is some form of parallel testing. So, do my synthetic respondents fill out a survey like human respondents would with the same sort of like sample definitions and audience definitions and so on? For example, I mean, there could be other ways of looking at it, right? Yeah. And then the second bucket, the second category is predictive. Like if my digital twin says, hey, I represent whatever segment of people and I really like your ad, does the ad succeed, right? So that's future oriented.
Sure.
And I think people confuse those sets of claims constantly. They'll say like, ours are accurate or predictive, but really what they mean is they're predictive of a certain correlation between human responses and digital twin or synthetic responses. They don't actually mean like it's predictive of the future. Really what they mean is it's predictive of the present seen through the lens of an old school survey. But that's hard too, right? But that's a very different kind of claim than like it's predictive of the future. And it's really important for like buyers to know the difference between those claims.
Yeah, and I would say too, kind of building on that point that if we're talking about a comparison to how a normal person would take a normal survey, we're also assuming that normal person taking that normal survey, everything is happening under ideal circumstances.
Oh yeah.
Where the person, so, and it's like, and I think that we should all be reflective enough on what's happened with bots and data quality and everything else that, for the past, since internet surveys have been around, have we really been providing a good enough experience for a participant that after
I mean, it's like why is 10,000 humans succeeding, right? Largely because you're controlling for fixing, managing a lot of the really negative aspects of survey experience, recruiting, all of that stuff that are so endemic to the industry, right? And you all are very differentiated when it comes to that, and that's awesome. But which survey are you comparing digital twin outputs to?
Exactly.
And there's this like, I don't want to say hilarious, but it's like this really funny thing where we'll be talking to a client and we'll say, hey, what do you think about like the survey sample you have? Oh, it's terrible. It's just 30% fraudulent. We caught, all of these like guys in whatever country taking the survey instead. And then you'll say, well, how do you want to evaluate our platform that's generating like synthetic data? And they'll say, well, we're going to compare it to our survey responses, of course.
Yeah.
So that presents a huge problem, because if your ground truth is a horrifically bad survey that maybe is like 100 questions long anyway, and which even if you had good sample, the response quality is going to like totally drop off by the end, et cetera, et cetera.
No human being process information that way.
Exactly. By the way, synthetic respondents can't, right?
Yeah, right.
So we get in this kind of like weird situation that I think is quite fascinating, that kind of gets at like the nature of knowledge, really like deep epistemological questions, which is like, if our ground truth is a survey, human taking a survey, and we have synthetic respondents, we can configure a synthetic respondent to be less rational. But do we want to? Well, the answer always is we want to be useful. So if certain forms of human irrationality, not that I believe in like a hard and fast distinction or whatever, but are really important to like a purchasing decision, then like we want to include those forms of irrationality. But if certain forms of human irrationality are just relevant to like the survey experience, maybe we don't want to include them. And then, like when we generate synthetic data, it's this really cool process where it's automated, but between iterations of the data, there's like basically a team of superhero agents, and each agent has like a different role to kind of QA the data, right? And one thing that it looks at is like internal consistency. Like if you answer C on number 1 and D on number 6, and those are logically in conflict, like what do we do about it? But humans do that all the time, as we know. So, we have kind of solutions to those things, but I just think it's really important for people to know that there's no like hard and fast answer, right? And
it goes back to what we were saying before. Like if you, so there's a place for both of these things. So
Mhm.
constantly like thinking about it in a binary way where it's like either this or that is,
Yep.
you know, meaning either a human or a synthetic is not the right way to be thinking about this.
Nope.
These are both going to be standalone methodologies with standalone use cases. And, you know, I would continue, I take the position and I'd continue to take the position. If our industry, especially quant surveys,
Mhm.
constantly stays in the space where what it wants is too long and too cheap,
Mhm.
then you are not like this is you're going to force this all towards
Yep.
synthetic
Yep.
because and one would argue you already have,
Yeah.
right? So like if
Yeah.
our data pools are garbage, if the survey experience is terrible, if you know, programming is complicated, if all of these things are already true, and we're you know, firstly, again, this, it's not this or this, it's let's fix this and then let's roll this
Yeah.
in and
Well,
use these things together.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you about a conversation I had with like a head of insights for like a Fortune 100 brand. And where we came to is like, okay, world A, you have massive surveys with race to the bottom commodity pricing per
Yeah.
response, high degrees of fraud, very little ability to use the survey to like for discovery because like
Yeah.
the open ends aren't that good and da, da, da. That's world A, and you're spending a certain amount per CPI. Cool. World B is, you know, you're going to maybe half the number of respondents half the time, but the CPI is higher and the data quality is higher. You're asking better questions. You're mixing
You're not
in.
paying to clean it.
You're not
Yeah,
paying to clean it. You're mixing in some qual interviews, and then you're layering on top of that really top quality digital twin or synthetic data capabilities. And the CPI in the end ends up being the same.
Yeah.
Go for world B. World A is a disaster, and it's the world most of us live in. So to me, it's not really like, oh, we're going to supersede the human. And believe me, I know that I'm a realist. I know lots of companies, it's going to be a race to the bottom anyway. But
Right.
the smart ones are going to say, you know what, synthetic data, digital twins, all of this stuff, AI enabled like analysis, coding, etc. That gives us space to choose our spots more for human
Right.
research, to spend more on each CPI, to have better data quality, and then to create a kind of iterative feedback loop, a real system where we're getting smarter over time and we're looking at the outputs. That's the vision. It's not about getting rid of human data. It's about focusing on the right stuff. And I just have to say, like, oh, go ahead. Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
UX, like UX research, right? You know, like UX research is
totally
smaller sample sizes, faster iterations. If you've got smaller sample sizes, guaranteed people, and you're embedding, you know, the digital twin or synthetic users within it, either to discover ideas that then you validate, that then you iterate on.
That's exactly right. Yep. And you move from a kind of episodic research model to a model where there are kind of continuous interactions between decision makers and data, perhaps in the form of a digital twin or chat with data or whatever. And I guess that brings me to the last, I know there's a million pet peeves, but like the last one that really like bothers me, which is like the thing I'm going to be focusing on a lot actually with Panoplai in terms of like our thought leadership and publishing and stuff, is I think there's this emerging discourse that's right, that like we're increasingly living in a world of AI slop, and companies don't want to be investing in AI slop, and you know, generative AI tends in the direction of sort of like reproducing the heart of the bell curve and saying the same stuff in the same kind of boring way, and every company is going to like create the same marketing and innovate in the same way, and you know, it's all going to be like a disaster. All of those are true tendencies, natural tendencies of AI. But my claim is that actually, if you have the right training data, which is to say not just the quant stuff, but really clever like qual, you know, competently interviewed ethnographic field notes, whatever. So the signals are in there. Yeah, and then you have the right platform, not just Panoplai's, but whoever's doing it right. And then you have the right, not only outputs, but, you know, training and enablement and processes for like human researchers and marketers and innovators to actually engage with the platform. You're going to have much more successful, innovative outcomes and breakthrough campaigns that are differentiated than you would with the current model of pure human research. So it's not like AI versus human. It's human kind of with the current situation versus AI plus human, where human judgment can be applied to data that's been, processed and analyzed and compared using AI to supercharge, your ability to like listen to the signals. So, one thing we're really looking at, and I think we've kind of proven this with some clients, is that we can actually help supercharge innovation, even like the divergent moments where you're coming up with like new ideas or listening for new signals with AI. It's not just about like inefficiency play or cost cutting play or getting rid of people. So that's the thing I really want to focus on moving forward.
Yeah. And the companies that do focus on it in that direction will produce slop, and they will try to sell it as human work when it's not human work, and it's obvious. So, and you're already seeing that, right? So I think that like, I don't have a ton of faith in things the way they're going, just sort of broadly speaking. But I will say that like, I hope I don't have to imagine a world where the slop just takes over. I hope that it's the people who are really using it as a tool to leverage their own way of thinking or their company's point of view, or to make things, that it becomes another accessory to make everyone have sort of a better experience, and it elevates things as opposed to, and I get why people think that it won't, because we're already seeing in some cases that it is not, but it's becoming increasingly obvious when it is AI slop. And so I think that's I don't know. I think that you're right to call that out, and you're right to focus on that being the way that you guys are thinking about presenting yourself and your own point of view and how to work through that stuff.
Yeah, totally. It's last thing I'll say is like, I think we were at like a company like sales kickoff or something, and somebody asked, "Oh, where do you think the industry will be in like five years?" It's like a classic. And my answer was, there's going to be inversion in terms of the value placed on efficiency and seamlessness, right? Like for years we heard that term seamless, like we're going to have a seamless process,
seamless integration,
right? Seamless integration. AI like enables the appearance of the experience of seamlessness really quickly and really easily. So I think the what we should be striving for now is actually friction. Which is to say, like, instead of thinking about making the process optimally efficient but achieving a suboptimal goal, let's actually engineer in moments of friction for humans who are really smart, working in teams to apply judgment to slow things down, and then make deliberate decisions about the next phase of the AI thing. And I think that the future of the insights industry is also that. Like, all of us need to train ourselves to be like orchestrators and editors and people who are strategists, who can say like, "Hey man, slow that AI process down because it's doing the wrong thing. Actually, we want to apply some human creativity or judgment here before the next loop."
Agreed.
So that's kind of how we think we're building our platform, is like, we're imagining that smart like insights leader, early career insights person, marketer, whatever, saying like, "Hold on, let me dive into the platform and see if that really makes sense. Let me look at the underlying data. Let me make a kind of leap of faith to try something new. And then maybe Panoplai can help me get there." And that's the world I'd like to build for. And that's the world I'm excited about.
Yeah, that's very much how we think about it internally. That we're building these things in the background, and then before we go on, and it seems like it's wonderful and it's great, and then you start applying some exercises to it to see if it's actually useful, and and it's not, and it's like, okay, stop everyone, but we're not getting on to the next phase of this until we go back and we make sure that this stuff is bulletproof in its first iteration. So I think you will see people who are not just strategically thinking about it, but are also, like, you have to really be interested in its capabilities, and I think in order to be applying that kind of structure to it. So anyway, okay, last question for you. So what are you most excited about? And that's like a really sort of purposefully vague and broad question, because it could be what you're most excited about within your organization, or what you're excited about consumer industry, or what you're excited about so just go where you want with that question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm personally most excited about is figuring out how this stuff can actually be useful to people, which sounds like a awfully like broad and like silly answer, but it's the hardest thing. And I think that we're kind of at the moment of early adoption in lots of ways. We're at the moment of lots and lots of pilots, the vast majority of which won't succeed and won't actually help companies, organizations transform. And what I'd like to see is sustained change where the focus is on enabling people to do really great work and adding value as opposed to just adding efficiencies, and changing organizations sort of from the outside in much more kind of responsive ways so that customer, consumer, audience understanding that's real seeps into the heart of the organization, and there's much more of an unbroken thread between that outside, whatever's going on, and the decisions that get made at every level. And I'd love for our platform to like play a little role in that, but I think that that's where the smartest, most forward-thinking organizations are gonna get, hopefully. And hopefully that will mean more responsiveness, not only or instead of responsiveness like to shareholders, but to other constituencies, you know, out in the world. And of course, that's not just true for-profit organizations. We have lots of like cool NGO and advocacy organization clients, politicians, whatever. And I think that we live in this like weird world where there's an incredibly granular set of data that's flowing in, you know, to help us understand. They're telling me that it's closing down, but that's fine.
We got like 2 more minutes.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that, you know, we live in this world where we're able to, of course, gather data in incredibly granular ways about like groups of people all over the world. And, you know, it's become a cliche, like we're drowning in that data.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we just know far less, I think, about people, about audiences than we did in the past. There are more surprises, and many of them can be unfortunate or, you know, depending on your point of view. So it's like, how do we get to a place where all of those incredibly atomized groups of people out in the world generating all of these different signals, that we can listen a little bit more effectively and generate a little bit more like composite sense of where things are, and then be more responsive to, you know, the electorate as a whole, or like the market as a whole. You know, rather
how do
than
we use it to make ourselves more literate? Not, you know, I think everyone's initial fear is that people are going to stop being able to think. And we've already seen that with the internet sort of broadly, you know, that people have become a lot less critical. It's easier to spin up information that is fake. And, you know, and hopefully this will, you know, again, can be used as a tool where we're learning about each other and we're learning how to process information in a better, more interesting way. Okay.
Totally.
So you're getting kicked out of there. But what I want to say before we go, you will be at IIEX. Tell me a little bit about what you're going to be doing there.
Yeah, so 2 things. Number one, my amazing colleague Kelsey will be co-presenting with Scott's, the lawn care company, which is a client of ours, really focusing on data gathering and kind of interactive data repositories. That's cool. Don't miss it. The other thing is that we have been nominated for Innovation of the Year Award, which is
so exciting.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's been a while in the application. I'm a academic at heart, so I've written 80 billion applications to things. It might be my only real talent.
Be a good side hustle.
It'd be a good side hustle. And we're going to be up on stage. There are 5 super worthy nominees, but hopefully we'll say something over 5 minutes that gets the crowd excited and into it. We'll tell a little bit of the story that I just told you now. And please come and listen and ask hard questions or heckle us or whatever.
I'll do all of the above, hopefully. So because I will be there too. So let's make sure and catch up there. And this has been great.
Okay. Thanks so much, Kerry.